Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Julia Hannigsberg, and I'm the VP Admin and Finance here at Ryerson, and it is just fantastic to see such a great turnout for this Women in Leadership Forum. This is a special group today, which we'll call this Women in Leadership Plus. And this was an event where we asked you, who are our regular attendees and regular members of this group, to bring with you a mentee or a younger woman or a different woman to enjoy this discussion as well, because we knew that it was going to be really special and really interesting. I have my copy of Reva Seth's book. There are other copies for sale. The bookstore is here with us today, and Reva will be doing a signing for us today, which is exciting. Jocelyn Cote-O'Hara from the board is here today. Thank you, Jocelyn, for joining us. And I'm mentioning you in particular not only because you're wonderfully special and we love our board, but because when Jocelyn came in, I was looking forward to meeting her daughter, who was supposed to come with her as her younger woman she was bringing. And I said, I haven't seen your daughter. And she said, oh, she can't come here. One of the kids is sick. So that struck me as ironic and poignant and just about exactly right for the discussion that we're having today, where we are using and really delighted to have Reva here with her new book, The MomShift, as a bit of a catalyst for a discussion about this issue. So we are going to have, after some very brief introduction from me, a panel that I think should be a lot of fun. Joining me are Alex Johnston, Executive Director of Catalyst Canada, and Rena here, reporter and anchor at CP24. So maybe we can just welcome our guests. I'm really pleased about the strong connection between Ryerson and this book. I know that when Reva was starting out her work, she was networking with lots of people, and one of those who opened up his network to her was Dean of Ted Rogers School of Management, Emeritus Ken Jones. And I know through Ken, Reva connected to a number of people, including one of the interviewees featured in the book, Bushra Afaki, an alumni of the TRSM, alum of the TRSM MBA program. And so it's great to be able to host the event here and to have this connection. You know, and on the other hand, it's kind of funny, when we announced today's topic, our Dean of Science, Imogen Coe, and I don't think I see Imogen here, she said to me, oh, I cannot believe we're having this discussion. Can you have a successful career after kids? Give me a break. And it was really funny because it just demonstrates, I'd say, the pressing need for this book, that we are still continuing to have this conversation. And it's that the conversation is not only a conversation that Reva reflects in her own experience and the experience of women in the book, but it's something we hear from our students all the time. It's something we hear from younger women in the workforce. I'm looking at people from HR who do recruitment. It's people coming into the workplace asking of themselves these questions. So as much as on the one hand, one wants to say, for heaven's sake, let's stop talking about this. On the other hand, we know from day-to-day experience that the issues that are discussed in the book, and we'll have some time in the panel to discuss, are pressing issues for all of us in one way or another, and particularly for the younger women who are thinking about their place in the workforce, thinking about the place of family, and how that will influence their careers and their lives going forward. So with that, I would love to invite Alex, Rena, and Reva to join me on stage here, and we'll take a seat, and I'll turn it over to you, Reva, for our panel.
Can we go here? I think I sit here. Do you have a preference? Thank you very much for that introduction, Julia, and thank you so much for everyone who's here, and thank you for organizing this. I thought just to start it off, I'll pick up a bit on my own story and maybe just start with the story you told on why are we still here, because that is the giant question. I wrote this book because it's very much the book that I was looking for when I first found out I was pregnant. I grew up with a stay-at-home mom, and very much the message that you get a career, get a profession, and children are going to get in the way of that. And so that's what I set about doing. I went to law school. I became a lawyer. I started on Bay Street. I hated it, and I left. And I had moved to the UK And I was in the middle of a career transition. I'd just taken a job, so I was at the bottom of a PR firm. And 3 days after my wedding, I found out I was 3 months pregnant. So a huge shocker. I found out why my dress didn't fit. And I was personally devastated, which sounds like a terrible thing to say. And it sounds overdramatic and ridiculous. But I really felt like my career was now over before I had even started it. And to a third-party person looking at it, you know, I was healthy. I had a great education, even though I wasn't using it at the time, I felt. I lived in a safe country. I had all of these things going for me. Yet I felt like I was honestly the first woman going down this path, and I had no idea how I was going to do it. I started doing maybe what a lot of people do when this happens. I started reading all the business and self-help books. And, you know, there's so much literature out there on this. And what I found was that these stories weren't speaking to me. To use a current example, it's like picking up Lean In, which is an amazing book. And I think Sheryl Sandberg is inspirational and certainly aspirational. But if you gave me that book when I was sitting there crying and staring at my CV, it wouldn't have helped me because I wasn't independently wealthy. I didn't feel, you know, it was just so far removed from where I was. What I needed was really practical ideas about how I was going to do this. What if I didn't want just a traditional lean-in corporate career? Could I still be successful? These were the questions that really plagued me and really, I guess, drove me to find what I ended up doing is I started to look in my own network, and I realized I knew lots of moms all around me who were more successful after having kids, but you never heard those stories. At the time, like I said, I was living in the UK, and one thing I really noticed is that the media loved the story of the high-flying career mom who then has kids and it all plummets. And it really spoke to me that we never hear positive stories of relatable working moms. I mean, either we hear the Sheryl Sandberg stories, or we hear, you know, my best celebrity body ever, my best post-baby, like things with stars in their post-baby bodies, but nothing that really spoke to what's actually happening out there. So this is what the MomShift is to me, a very personal book. How I started going about it, as Julia mentioned, I decided when I came back, and so I'll just kind of quickly go through my own story. My son was born in 2006, and contrary to what anything I'd ever heard, is my career really coalesced and came together when I became a parent. And that was something I feel like I'd never heard out there, but in all kinds of ways, you know, I think it made me grow up a great deal. I think it prompted me to really start to do things I knew I wanted to do but hadn't done. I'll give you an example of that. I knew I always wanted to write a book. And I'd very much grown up with a lot of moms around me saying, you know, I would have done this if it weren't for the kids. And that is a horrible thing to hear as a kid, to hear that, you know, your mom or her friends would have had this great other life if it weren't for you. And so I remember one night, it was one of those early, in the first 6 weeks, being up with the baby and really remembering that story. And I thought, I never want to do that to my son. And I actually took a sticky and I stuck it on my bathroom mirror. And it said, you know, Seth, that's my son's name, which is my maiden name, a whole different story. But he's never going to be an excuse for something I want to do. He's going to be the reason I do it, because I want him to grow up knowing I lived my life the way I wanted to. You're free to do what you want to do also. And so this book that I wanted to write, I actually started moving on it. I sent it out to over 50 agents before I got an agent. I really started to realize on goals I wanted. I ended up selling that book to Simon & Schuster, and it came out in 2008. So big things like that happened that I directly linked to my son, because a lot changed within me. A lot changed in terms of, I thought, how the workplace saw me for the better. I also ended up starting my own communications consultancy in the UK. The law degree ended up coming in useful. I got a lot of hedge fund clients, a lot of great nonprofits. So work life really came together for me. And so this book is a reflection of my story, and then all of the 500 plus stories I went out and got the opportunity to hear. And so what I did, I'll just tell you a bit about the process. It took 5 years to do. I ended up partnering with a whole range of institutions, including Ryerson, many corporate companies, including Scotiabank, Edelman, Dentons. And one of the reasons I did this is that I really wanted to understand from an organizational side, what are they seeing? What are the trends that they're hearing from their workforce? And why is it that we are still here? And what can we do differently? And so before we kick off to the panel, I'll just tell you a bit about what I found. So overwhelmingly, one of the reasons we're still here is that something still isn't working, right? Women still feel like they do have to make this choice, where either it's going to be a career or it's going to be a great family life. And one of the lessons that came out from the book and from the research with organizations is that one of the reasons we still have this either-or framework is that we're not doing enough to share all of the stories and all of the different ways that you can be successful. I like to say I'm here with good news. The good news is women today have more choices than ever in terms of how you create your families and how you create your careers. And what we need to do is have more conversations that share that and show that. One of the great things I love about all the stories is that they really animate what that looks like. So it's great to hear about a flexible workday, but what does that mean? Like, what does that really look like? And that's what the book does. It sort of granularly shows you all of the different ways to set it up, with the other big message that I found that was really missing is that there's no right way to do this. I really find it frustrating when you see the dogmatic sort of career books that say, here's the path, follow it. It doesn't look like that because every person's family is different. Everyone's goals and careers are different. And the other big lesson that came out as I followed these stories over 5 years is that it's constantly changing. So what works for you today in this moment might not be what you're interested in or what you need to do a couple years from now. And so the goal, I think, is to start to share real conversations like we're going to do up here and say, what are the different ways it looks like? How have you changed? What's influencing, why we still think in this narrow framework of either careers or kids? And so I thought just to start it off, instead of me doing an introduction to our panelists, I'll just ask each of you to introduce yourselves and maybe share a bit about where you are now and how your own post-baby career journey unrolled. Do you want to start from here, Alex, and then work down?
Mine's probably the most horrifically complicated, so we'll start with.
So we'll do the reverse.
That's a kind of crazy story. I've known Alex during her entire crazy story of family formation. Sure, so you all know who I am, and you know what I do. I've been at Ryerson now for a bit over 8 years, and before that I spent about 10 years in the Ontario Public Service. And I wanted to be a mom always, and I think always I kind of underestimated how complicated that might be. I never wondered would I have a career and be a mom. It was obvious to me. In my family, my mom always worked because that was financially the situation we were in. So that was always sort of my expectation. I think I always had unrealistic expectations, though. So to give you example number one, I thought the great time to finish my PhD dissertation was when I had that free time after I had my first child. Because what else would I have to do with myself? So I'm like, no problem. Well, my supervisor's still waiting, put it that way, and she's turning 18. So you get a sense of how that's working out for me. Not so much. Hence, I'm not an academic. I do what I do. I think that, like the other women in the stories that are written about in the book, I too have had great experiences along my career that seem to coalesce around the times when I had my children. I've got 3 children, an almost 18-year-old and 13-year-old twins. We used to joke in my house that I tended to get my best raises when I was on mat leave, so not being at work was really a way for me to achieve great success. And I really benefited from, women role models and mentors who saw possibilities in me that I didn't see in myself. And I'll just tell one story if you don't mind. When I was in the Ministry of the Attorney General and the provincial government, I was offered a really interesting opportunity going to work in the office of the Deputy Minister and Deputy Attorney General. And it would have been a job where I was liaising with the Attorney General at the time, and it was a new position. It was really neat. And I happened to be about 2 months pregnant with my twins. And I'd had a really lousy pregnancy with my first child, so I had a vision of what this was going to look like, and it wasn't pretty. So I sort of struggled, but it was clear to me that I had to say no, but I struggled because I hadn't told anyone I was pregnant yet. So how do you say no to an obvious opportunity that you'd have to be crazy to say no to without saying why you're saying no? So I sat down with the person who was talking to me about the job, and I said, well, it's a wonderful opportunity, and I have to say no because I'm pregnant. And the answer was, why do you have to say no? And we had a conversation. I ended up taking the job. About 4 months into the job, I was on bed rest and spent the rest of my pregnancy on bed rest and did a bit of telecommuting, and that worked out as well. But I think part of the reason that conversation went the way it did was because the woman, the Deputy Attorney General at that time, who later became Cabinet Secretary, and she got to have her as a boss again in a next career, she had kids. At that stage, I think university-age kids, and she had a husband with MS. And I think she had a picture in her head of how you could make the mix of work and family responsibilities come together that made my situation look entirely possible to her. And the fact that she saw it as entirely possible allowed me to see it as entirely possible and enter into an opportunity, but for which I would say, if I look at the various steps, I wouldn't be here today. So I think that opportunities like the opportunity away today, where we bring women together, really create the foundation for changing our expectations we can have of ourselves. And I think reading the stories in the book can do that, just like having these kinds of conversations.
I'd add one point to that. That's such a great story on the idea of the importance of employers realizing that it's entirely possible. There's a study that's referenced in the book that some of you may know called the motherhood penalty. And what it is they send out a series of CVs, the researchers, where everyone is entirely the same on paper, but for one line that references that someone's involved in the PTA who's a woman, and same with the male counterpart. And what they found was that the person who identified as a mother overwhelmingly receives far fewer job offers. She also receives $11,000 less in job when she's offered the job. Mm-hmm. The woman who's just the same as her male counterpart without children, it's pretty much equal in terms of the salary and the number of job offers. And then the interesting twist is that the man who identifies as a father receives a $6,000 bonus over all of that group. And I think this speaks very much to the story that Julia just told, which is that one reason to actually get change to happen is for colleagues and employers and organizations to really understand that it really is possible, and it is worth investing in female talent in what might seem like, at times, maybe messy or something that's outside of the norm, because it does end up working. And so that's so lucky that you had that person who realized that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Rena?
My name is Rena here. I'm an anchor and reporter at CP24. I started in television a little bit late. I started out in high tech as soon as I graduated from university. I was in the field for about 4 years, and I started looking at the CEO's office, and I started thinking, I don't know, is that ultimately where I really want to end up, or one of the director's offices, and thought, am I just so excited to be in there? And the answer was no. I wasn't passionate about anything like that. And then I realized at 26, what I was really passionate about was something I had abandoned, and that was the idea of getting into television, telling people stories. And at the age of 26, I was already married. I'd been married to my husband for about 2 years at that point. And I said to him, this is something I'd like to do, even though my career is well on its way. I just don't feel like I'm in the right place, and I don't feel like I'm doing the right thing. And he was very supportive, because we got married so early. I supported him while he established his first practice, helped him out with his student loans. So his whole thing was, it's now your turn, so do what you need to do, and I'm here to help. So I took a massive pay cut, massive. It just seemed like total nonsense at the time. Got in through the back door at a local multicultural station. And I was very lucky. I was working for a wonderful man who was a great mentor, took me under his wing. He knew I was very enthusiastic about learning the business, so I learned a lot. I did not make a lot of money. I worked too hard. I've often worked 7 days a week, and I could. At the time, I didn't have kids to go home to. And I thought, this is what you do to make it in this business. You work 7 days a week, you work for terrible pay, but you do it for the love of it. And I sort of resigned myself to that. Anyway, spent 2 years at that station. It was an amazing experience. I worked hard, earned very little, but I loved it, wouldn't replace it with anything. And then when I got my first job on air at Global BC, I took the job when I found out I was pregnant. So as I was sitting there through my contract negotiation, I did not do the honorable thing and divulge my pregnancy. I just sucked my stomach in and signed on the dotted line. And I remember thinking, you know, I can't hide this for very long. I'm going to be on TV with a big belly. This is crazy. But I did it anyway. I signed the contract, and I thought, it's none of their business. I have to do my job well. And as long as I can do my job well and I can prove that I'm, you know, that I possess all the talents they need, that's the most important thing. And screw it. So it wasn't a fun conversation to have 30 days later. You know, being the new kid in the office, and then saying, oh, by the way, thanks for hiring me, and I'm pregnant. And I remember the look on my boss's face. He looked at me like, okay. And I said, you know, don't worry, you know, I will work twice as hard, and after I have the baby, I'll make sure I'm back within a certain amount of time. I wish I hadn't made that promise, but I did. And looking back, I probably had to make that promise. Otherwise, things wouldn't have worked out maybe in the long term the way that they had. So anyways, so I took that job, had my pregnancy on television, and in BC, for some strange reason, the female anchors and reporters weren't having babies. Because I really felt like I was the first person to be on television with a massive pregnant belly, and I got these nasty emails. Oh, why is this woman on TV? She looks like a pylon, and why do you put pregnant women on TV? Shouldn't she be at home having that baby? So I had to go through a lot of stuff. Got through it, and everything was fine. Had a beautiful baby, and he's phenomenal. But just like Reva said, you know, a lot of my opportunities, and at that point, I remember sitting in that office, looking at that contract and saying, this is my next step up. I don't know when, in a market like Vancouver, I'm going to get a chance to have that next step up. There are limited opportunities. So anyway, at that point, I just did what I had to do, and then you know, coped with being a new mom, waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning, you know, putting in a full day, coming home, and trying to be involved and engaged with my baby, and not make him feel like he was dealing with this horribly tired, exhausted, ragged mother, which I was. But that was what it was. And it was funny, as soon as I had Arjun, shortly after that, I'd say 9 months after that, I got a job offer from CTV National. It was in Vancouver, but it was great, and I took that job. And then they pulled the plug on the show that I was working on after only 4 months. And that put me in a weird career limbo, but that had nothing to do with my family. It was just I was in a bit of limbo. And then they had an opportunity out in Toronto. We were in Vancouver. I had a 1-year-old or 2-year-old baby at that point, and we just bought a house. We decided on our neighborhood. We decided on our schools. Everything was set, and then all of a sudden, I had this job offer from Toronto. And I looked at my husband, and he had been in his practice for a few years at that point. He'd started when he was 25, 26. So his practice was coming along, and he was building it, and he loved it. He was very excited about it. And I told him about the job offer. It was never a question of, we can't do it. It was always a question of, you know, we've got this, what do you think? And as a unit, you know, we decided we probably wouldn't want to do this later, so why not do this now? And he was great. He was like, well, let me see if I can sell my practice. And he was lucky, he found a buyer. We were able to sell his practice. We were gone within 2 weeks. We sold the house, packed our belongings into a massive truck, and you know, days later we were in Toronto. And the kind of opportunities that I've had since Arjun was born were just phenomenal. And even though the first time I announced my pregnancy, the experience was really difficult, and I felt horrible, and it was never comfortable, and the environment wasn't baby-friendly or mother-friendly or parent-friendly. The second time I got pregnant, I was 1 year into my job in Toronto, or a year and a half into my job here in Toronto, and I walked into my boss's office thinking, oh God, I wonder how this is gonna go. And I sat down and I said, I have something to tell you. And he said, are you gonna tell me you're pregnant? Yes, I am, but you don't look upset. And he was like, family's everything. He said, family's first. And he said, at this time, we will work around you. He said, we make you work around us all the time. I know this can be a crazy place, but this is a very important time in your life. Raising your family and growing your family is one of the most important things you will ever do. So he said, we will do what we can to make it better and make it comfortable. So, that happens. You can have experience number one like I did, then you can have, an experience like the second experience that I did. And it can all eventually work out quite nicely.
I would love to add 2 points to that. So going back to what you said in your introduction, Julia, where your colleague said, why are we still here? I think it's so interesting. So I'm going to share my own story of hiding pregnancy. So why are we still here? Why do we still feel like we need to hide when we're pregnant? When I was negotiating the book deal for the MomShift, I was, I think, about 6 months pregnant with my third son. And so third child, second book. Yet I had heard so many stories about women losing opportunities when they were pregnant that I thought, there's no way I can tell Random House that I'm pregnant. So I didn't tell my publisher, I didn't tell my agent, who flew out from Vancouver, and I didn't tell anyone who was at the table from Random House. They were all working moms, yet I still felt like I bought 2 pairs of Spanx, pulled it on, which was agony. It was brutal. And I had my mother being like, you're probably damaging the baby. And I was like, it's an hour. Didn't women used to wear corsets? Bought an A-line dress. So you couldn't tell I was pregnant at all. I mean, I just looked like I needed to hit a gym. You wouldn't have thought pregnant. Negotiated the book deal. We signed it. It ended up being due, the first draft, 3 weeks after the baby was supposed to be due. But I honestly felt, after hearing all of these stories, that I just couldn't risk it. And it's funny, yesterday I was at another event, and a 28-year-old woman who's a second-year associate, a litigation associate at one of the big law firms, came and told me her story where she's pregnant, and she's been throwing up a ton at work and working late nights, early mornings. So our senior partner working on this case with her called her in and said, do you have a drug problem? And she said, no, actually, I'm pregnant. And he actually said it would have been easier if it was just the drugs. And I was like, that is crazy, right? But that's why we're still having this, because that's still the mentality out there. On that note, Alex, do you wanna...
So great stories. I'm Alex Johnston. I'm the Executive Director for Catalyst Canada, and the work we do is sort of research and resources to support typically large organizations, Fortune 500, FP 500 companies in developing their talent and advancing their women. So generating interesting conversation. I love both of those stories, and elements of each resonate. But I now have 2 5-year-old girls and a 4-year-old son. I always say that kids did not come anywhere close to derailing my career. Infertility did. And so the struggle to have kids, which was a joyless, thankless, time-consuming, money-consuming struggle that lasted a very long time, was a really tough experience. Once we had kids, I think that the challenges anyone in this room with kids know so well are very real, but there's such a joy that comes along with it that I don't think the balanced conversation or the integrating conversation is nearly as significant as the happiness conversation. People will say, it goes by like that, and you think, oh my God, it's going by like that. For the first time 2 months ago, a wonderful woman who was doing an event with us in Calgary, who's in her early 50s, said, I didn't really think of my career that way. And it's no different for my kids. I'm in my early 50s now. I'm in the tail end of my career, and it's gone by so quickly. And I thought that, to me, is the challenge. It's being in it with your kids, being in it with your career, and enjoying them. And there are times when you don't, and there are days when you don't. The things that I find interesting in my sort of professional, personal experience from a self-reflection point of view are, on the one hand, I had a very supportive work environment. Because it took so long, because with my daughters, surrogates carried them, it was kind of a celebratory event in my work environment, and on one hand, people were very supportive. The flip side of that is I took 8 months, and when I came back, it was fascinating. My boss at the time, I think, viewed me as a terrible thorn in his side, not the premier. But he really wanted to use my baby as an excuse to kind of move me out and move someone in the role that I think he would view as more him-friendly. And it was fascinating because in the anticipation of coming back, we sort of planned things out, and he kept talking about the fact that you only have this once, and the joys of children and how important they are, and I kept saying, super cute, love my babies, and I'll be back just after Labor Day. And I realized he was using this as an opportunity to try to coax me into really stepping out of a role that I'd come to love and cherish. Fortunately, the premier, who was my big boss at the time, said at one point, do I hear you're not coming back? What's going on? I was like, don't worry, I'll be back after Labor Day. But that dynamic was an interesting one. Once I got back, for the first time I realized I loved my job, and in leaving my job, I wanted to make sure it was in good hands, and the person who filled my role was a very capable person, and that I really believe is the right thing to do. But that person grows into your role, and you have to come back and, in a firm but diplomatic way, reclaim your space. And that, to me, was the trickier dance that was news to me, but I had to navigate. The complicating factor, and this I find a bit surprising in myself, but my daughters are 3 months old, realize I'm very unexpectedly pregnant with my son, which we did not think was a possibility. And other than the shock factor, and when I told my husband, I said, I'm going to tell you news tonight that is probably going to be more surprising to you than if I told you I used to be a man. I told him, and then we sat in silence for probably 20 minutes, and he finally said, am I the father? And I said, yeah. He said, I don't remember having sex. I was like, neither do I, but something somewhere happened because I'm pregnant. And I was 11 weeks pregnant at the time, and the only reason I knew is because I thought I was going into menopause. So to go to my doctor and say, now I need to start taking all the weird drugs, rule it out, take the pregnancy test so you can say definitively you're not pregnant, I was like, holy shit. But all of my struggle, and having spent so long trying and working and blah, 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 was professional. And I felt like, how am I going to go back and do this job? And I spoke to a very dear friend who's a VP in a hospital now, who Julia knows well as well, Carly Farrow. And I was working through this, and she said, what's the problem? And I said, it's like 3 kids, and it's like 12 months, and 3 of them all together. And she said, what is the problem? And I said, how can they view me as employable? And she said, do you think you can do your job? And I said, of course I can do my job. She goes, what's the problem? And I said, there's no way every single person in that organization is not talking about me, saying there's no way she can do this. And she said, why is that your problem? And she said, go back, do exactly what you're going to do. You let this unfold the way you want it to unfold. And if someone wants or expects it to be differently, they'll let you know. And I never had a conversation with anyone. I never sat down. My intention was to go back and say, listen, I know this is complicated for you, and I'm sure you have lots of concerns, blah, 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 blah. And she said, why are you making an issue where there's no issue? I did with my son take 12 weeks, and then I sort of went back kind of part-time and then full-time. And again, I felt like in the role I was in and the time frame of the cycle we were in, that was the right thing to do. And a few years later, I took a year off. But I, both in terms of myself, was surprised that I was positioning myself as unemployable, even though I felt personally I was capable of taking, just bring it on, bring it on. And secondly, moving back in and really having to keep my elbows up and be very clear and very firm in a way I had never been before was interesting.
Just to add a quick note on that before we go to the next question, you raise one of the things that really organically came out of my research, which is that IVF and infertility, I think, is what mat leave used to be about 10 years ago, where we're not talking about it in workplaces. And it's a profoundly difficult conversation to have. Yet I kept hearing from woman after woman, they were saying, you know, I don't know, like there's no template in terms of HR or how to, do you tell people you're going each morning for an appointment? Should you say you're sick? Should you not? There's nothing on it at the moment. And I think this is one of the honest conversations that we need to start having in forums like this and in companies and just around, where I think, and I say in the book, there is no right or wrong way to have a baby. There's no right or wrong time. But your path to parenthood really does impact your professional life and your professional choices. And what I heard when I was doing my field research is that women really want to have these honest conversations so we can start to learn about what works, what doesn't, and how do you carry that into your own life and experience. So thank you for sharing that and raising that. The next question I had for the panel was, as I mentioned in my introduction, I was very much motivated by the fact that I felt that I didn't see relatable role models, and I'd grown up so much with this template that kids were a career obstacle. I know you mentioned, Julia, that you never saw it like that because of your own mom's experience. I think it'd be neat to get everyone to just comment on what shaped your views on it, and what do you see as shaping this discussion now?
I think, like I said, I always assumed I'd be a mom, but what I didn't have was a role model of a professional mother. You know, my mother kind of was a bookkeeper part-time. She found different jobs. She didn't have a profession, and there were obstacles to her having the full kind of education she should have had, and a professional life that she, you know, ought to have had. So I think what impacted me from that was I didn't really have a clear vision about timing. How would it work? You know, when was the right time to have a baby? How long are you going to take? All of those things, kind of the mechanics of how it would work. And I think that we are better now. I think we're better as an employer in many cases. I know we try to be better as an employer in that regard here, in terms of having more of those honest conversations. But there are lots of them we don't have. I think the infertility one is a great example. You know, there are lots of things. I think it's more easy to talk about children now. It's not 100% easy, but it's easier. And I make a real point of doing it, because I think part of being a role model is showing people the imperfections. I think when women are too good at looking like it's all like a piece of cake, and I've got my 3 kids, and I got my job, and look at me, blah, 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 you are really setting other people up for failure. And so I tell stories. Well, first of all, my people I work with know that they prop me up all the time. And I tell stories of stupidity and failure all the time, because I think it's, you know, encouraging to others that whatever they do, I've done a stupider thing. Like, there's no question. I can beat you. Tell me your stupid mom story. I've done it. So, and if you want later, I can give you stupid mom stories.
We are going to have that one of the questions.
One of the questions for the panel, your stupidest mother story. But I think, you know, revealing those conversations is really important. And I think infertility is one. I think disability is another. You could see people and you're like, why are they having problems with work-life integration? Like, they don't have kids. You don't know what's going on in other people's lives. And so opening up all those different conversations, I think, is really important. And you know, I think that's, I didn't necessarily see those in my life. I didn't know what those conversations would look like. And so I felt like I had to be making that up as I went along. And it took me a couple of tries. I was really lucky. People saved me. Because twice I can think of in my career where I said no to jobs, and the person I said no to wouldn't accept no for an answer. And you know, and I told you one story, and the other was I was on mat leave with my twins. And the person who had been the Deputy Attorney General by that point was the Secretary of Cabinet. She's head of the Public Service in Ontario, and I got a call from her, and I was like, you know, hadn't showered in days, for sure hadn't had coffee, you know, I'm like breastfeeding 2 babies, I don't know what the hell's going on. And she called me and she said, you know, I would love you to come and work for me and be counsel and cabinet office. And I said, yeah, you know, I've got 3 kids under 4, there's no way I can do that. You know, nice chatting with you, click. And I got a phone call about 10 minutes later from one of her staff, and they were like, are you crazy? Like, you don't say no, like, to that job. You don't say no to that person. What are you talking about? Do you want a redo of that? And I was like, okay, let me take a shower, have a cup of coffee. Let's hit rewind and start again. And I was lucky enough to get a reboot where she, you know, called me back. And she said, look, I've got 4,000 lawyers working for me. If you have to leave at 5, I can probably cope. And that was the, so I was really, you know, I kind of think I'm a slow learner, because it took me 2 tries where people didn't take no for an answer before I figured out that I could probably do a bunch of stuff and have kids. And again, to credit other people, and it's the point about employers being, you know, and the difference having an employer that is willing to see the possibilities. In that first year, when I was back at work after my twins were born, I worked a 9-to-5 workday. And I was never in before 9, and I always left at 5. And I started my work at Cabinet Office the week before 9/11 happened. And it was a very intense time for me professionally, and for, of course, in the context I was in. But having a boss who understood that it was a 9-to-5 thing, and moreover, that didn't roll her eyes when I left. You know, it's one thing to let you leave. It's another thing to let you leave with your head held high. Yeah. So I think there's a lot to say about, as others have already said, about the not only organizational attitude, but it's about human attitudes, and it's about how we approach individual opportunities and how we figure out ways to make things work for people.
I would love to just add a question to that. So for people who are listening to that story, who are maybe younger and starting their careers, and you hear that and you think, but how do you develop that cachet of whether it's professional goodwill or the relationships where they come back and say, no, Julia, we really want you, or they're invested in helping you with your career. Is there anything looking back that you or anyone else on the panel can add in terms of a tangible takeaway to how do you get that kind of, is it sponsorship, mentorship, or just a personal investment if you're starting out to build that for when you need it?
It's like what Alex was saying. Like, you work really, really hard.
Yeah.
And there are dividends you take from that.
Yeah.
And I don't know that, I think sometimes we're shy to draw down on that capital when the time comes.
Yeah.
But it's a conversation I often have with younger women, because I feel like this conversation about work-life happens all the time. So a young woman will come sit down to network with me, and she'll say, I'm really worried about work-life balance. I'll say, oh, okay, do you have kids? Oh, no, I don't have kids yet. It's like, are you married? No, God. It's like, do you have like a crush on anybody? Like, is there anything going on? So it's like, why are you worried about this? This is the time when you should be working internationally. You should be traveling. You should be working 20 hours a day on the most interesting things you can find to do, on the crazy files that other people can't do. Yeah. And that's where you build that capital up. Work-life issues will smack you in the face when they're ready to. You don't have to worry about them now. And I think that's part of it, is just go, pedal to the metal, full bore, when you're pregnant, whenever it is, up to that last minute. And I think that's a really good, that was one of the Sheryl Sandberg stories that really resonated with me in that book, was that idea of not leaving before you leave. And that sense that you really can push, you accumulate all that, and then you have to have the courage. And I think as women, we probably can use some encouragement to do this, to then draw down and to be explicit about, okay, it's my turn. And the really good employers, and I know a guy, Mike Rier, who's a former board chair at Ryerson and runs TELUS Health, and he tells me a great story because he was an entrepreneur and he hired a lot of women because he was in the healthcare field, a lot of nurses, a lot of pharmacists, a lot of allied health professionals. And he would always say, I always, of course, give people whatever they want in mat leave. This is a short period of time. I put this investment into them at this stage in their career. I've already trained them. I've invested so much of them in the front end. They think I'm a hero. They're so loyal to me. They're never going to leave afterward. And I'm like, I'm just a businessman. I'm just making a profit off your back, but I get to be a hero and you're going to stay here forever. So there's a lot of that, it's the business case stuff that, you guys talk all about all the time.
I think I connected Reva to you originally. We met, and I gave her Shelley Jamison's name, who is the head of the civil service in Ontario, and yours. And what I love is, Julia's amazing. To me, she's not relatable. She's up at 4:30. I don't think she sleeps. So I said to Reva, this is completely not a relatable example for me personally, because I need a lot of sleep. But I said, here's someone who manages 3 kids, a very big job. And I said she has put in the time where you have cultivated the kinds of relationships where they reach back and say, no. No is not the appropriate answer. We're going to make this work. But there are times when, it really is hunkering down. I think consistently doing a good job for anyone is the right message. As women, let's be conscious of not holding ourselves up to a much higher expectation than we hold others. I'm, the wonderful example of don't let perfection get in the way of progress, because there's lots I can take on during a day or a week, but not if I'm always trying to hold myself to a 10 on 10. I'm consistently a 7 on 10 performer. A strong 7. B+.
Strong 7.
A strong 7, exactly.
A strong 7.
7 with a bullet.
I'll let you be the judge.
Solid 7.
Yeah, solid 7.
Did you want to add anything?
Well, one of the things that, for me, I'd always known that I wanted a family. I knew that I wanted children. And for me, part of that was because of my mom. My mom's a very special, like everyone's mom. Everyone has a very special mom. But she treasured us as children. So I grew up feeling very treasured. What
a nice word.
Yeah. She was lovely. And she always made us feel that we made her life very special. And I just remember how it felt to grow up like that. And I knew I wanted to do the same for my kids. And I knew I wanted a family. I knew I wanted that comfort. I knew I wanted that place to go home to. And I knew for me anyway, as much as I did have a lot of career goals, at the same time, one of my big goals, even when I was young, was to have a family. and to have a solid, loving family. So I probably put as much energy into that as I did into building my career. And I always tell my husband the same thing. When he slacks at home, would you do this in your job? would you be like, yeah, I'll get to that. Would you do that in your job? When I ask you to do something and, you don't do it right away, would you do that in your job? Could all of the, do you know what I mean? Like, treat your home like you treat your career. Treat it like it will pay off. Like, there will be a payoff. Maybe it's not a tangible payoff. Maybe it's not money in your pocket. But trust me, at the end of the day, there will be a payoff. You'll only get out of it what you put into it. So I'm fortunate in that I have a husband who gets that message. And I think increasingly, whether he likes it or not.
He gets it all the time.
But it's probably one of those things that I never gave any thought to when I married my husband. I never thought about, how the baby conversation would go, whether he would be good at sharing the workload. He was not good at sharing the workload. It's something we really had to learn together, where I had to be comfortable with saying, yeah, you can do that, and almost perfectly, and I will be okay with it, because I have other important things to do as well. So having someone who's at the table, just as much as you, although, as a mother, I don't know if you ever feel like your partner is at the table as much as they could be, because for some reason we shoulder 90% of the guilt, and they shoulder 10. I don't know how they get away with that. Sometimes I'll ask him, don't you feel bad? Don't you wish you were? He's like, I have to work. And I thought, wow, I wish it could be that black and white for me, where I could be sitting, at the seat. I mean, one of the craziest things that ever happened to me, I don't know if you guys remember the occupation of St. James Park. Mm-hmm. So anyhow, we knew that, that the park was going to be raided the following morning, and the protesters were going to be kicked out. It was near the end of my shift, 10 o'clock at night, and I got a phone call from the newsroom asking me if I could stay overnight. We were going to broadcast live throughout the night. I was breastfeeding, and what would happen is I would get home at 11:30, and at midnight I would nurse the baby, and then she would sleep until 8 in the morning. Everything, we had our own little routine. So I was thinking, oh my gosh, she's going to miss a feeding, because here I am in this breaking news vehicle, and I can't leave the park, and this is going to be a problem, and things are going to get really hairy overnight, and I won't be there for them in the morning, and that. So all of this to think about. And I asked for a little break. I took a cab home, nursed the baby, took a cab back. Nobody knew I was gone. So you do these crazy, weird things just to make yourself feel better and to make things work. But at the end of the day, the point is, and I think that we need to, sometimes as women, be able to say, I value having a family, I value having children, I want kids, and I am willing to make that a priority. So I'm not in a place later where I've been guilted into putting all my energy toward a career, and then I feel like I have fewer choices because I allowed everything around me, our culture, our society, our workplaces, our leaders, to guilt me into feeling like, that's the second tier thing to do. Having a family is the thing you do when you're not highly motivated and hugely ambitious. It's not at all. It's a very important part of life, and if you want that to be a part of your life, be upfront about it with yourself and acknowledge it, and make it happen for yourself, just like you do with your career. And at the same time, I think we have to be very careful to pick partners that are fully involved and fully engaged, not somewhat engaged, because they reap the benefits at the end of the day. Yeah. When you're a father, you get just as much love and devotion from your children as mothers do. Do you know what I mean? You get the benefits at the end of the day. And this whole thing about men leaving for, because they're devoted to their children. If I find that there are so many men that I work with who say, oh, I can't be there for that. I have my son's hockey practice. And everybody pats them on the back, good for you. It's so devoted to your family. And as a woman, I don't feel comfortable saying, I have to leave early because my son has hockey practice, because I don't want them to think I'm not fully at the table and not fully engaged and not fully willing to give my job 100%. So I don't know. I guess it's just part of the conversation.
I want to pick up on one point that you raised on partners. One of the things that I love about Lean In is that she specifically raises this point that let's have conscious conversations about choosing our partners. My first book was a dating advice book. I didn't follow any of these things. I married someone after 7 dates. So it wasn't an arranged marriage. It just was very spontaneous. And I'm the only person on the panel who never, it seemed, thought I wanted kids. And so we never had this conversation before. And I was just working on a piece the other day, because it's 10 years since we got married. And it's 10 years since I wrote that book. And I was thinking, it is so crazy that I did that, where kids so profoundly shape your career choices, and your partner also shapes that I find it stressful sort of post facto that I just jumped into that. And I think it's really important. Like, if you go into a bookstore right now, there's the career aisle, there's the parenting aisle, and then there's the relationship aisle. Yet what this conversation is showing is that one choice somewhere bangs up and crashes against what happens somewhere else. And we need to stop putting these things in silos and have the nuanced, messy conversations that, you know, who you decide to create a family with, or if you decide to go it on your own, what does it look like? How does that impact the subsequent decisions? So I just wanted to add that in. Thank you for raising that. Do you want to
make another point on that? I mean, one of the things, I was just happened to be on the radio driving down here. I was listening to a story on, must have been Q, and it was about a book on lesbian and gay family formation. And it was really, and the author was talking about the fact that for many of the people that he had interviewed writing this book, the idea of being part of a book about family was very negative. Yeah. Because for gay people of LGBT community, family has been so much used as a weapon against, rather than an embracing of. And I think part of that discussion of partners, you know, there's a certain set of assumptions about what partnership looks like that, you know, is radically variable depending on the way you form your family. Yeah. And I think there's probably, in fact, I know there is a ton to learn from the various ways that families are formed. Yeah. And that for more traditional looking families, the way less traditional looking families make their lives work is very instructive. And the challenges faced by different kinds of families can be very different from some of ours. And I think that's another contentious piece of the Sheryl Sandberg story, where, you know, that reflection of a very traditional kind of partnership, even when she's requiring in the same way you do, in the same way I'm pretty fortunate to have in my male partner, someone who's a very engaged parent, there's lots of different ways that comes together. And there are lots of different impacts, I think, on this kind of MomShift set of issues, depending on how your family is formed.
Did you want to add anything to that, Alex?
Just, I didn't have a neat role model, but for sure my identity's been formed by elements of my mom and my dad. My mom was not sort of a stay-at-home mom, but not really. And my dad was a professional. It's in my late 20s after law school, when my husband was not working, that for the first time I realized I was the breadwinner. I was a lawyer at the time, making a good salary, terrible economy. And for the first time I realized this is my responsibility. And he was at home for about a year and a half, qualifying to become a lawyer. And it was a very different experience. And I realized I had internalized, even though I saw myself as a professional, much more of my mom than my dad. And I had internalized that I would be the secondary income earner, that I would be the secondary career, and that I would be responsible for essentially running the house. We, because he was at home, transitioned, so he ran the house, and I brought in the bacon. And I think that shaped our dynamic in positive ways. I've claimed childcare, and I would fight him for it, because my challenge in life with time is, you know, I drop the kids off, I zip into work, I cram it all in, I have 2 pieces of Swiss cheese and almonds at my desk for lunch. He'll often have a coffee or lunch with people. I get from a networking perspective, that's not the advice we often get as women, but that's my reality. Do nanny relief at 5:45, try to have lunches with my kids and mom's often Friday at my house from school, but I still have to put in 50 hours a week in my job to get things done. But it extends over seven days. I think realizing at the time that I was working and my husband wasn't, that I'd internalized all this stuff, I thought, whoa, what does this mean for how I saw myself? I think the second defining moment was in our late 30s, and I only share this because it was very sobering, was losing a child. There's nothing that creates perspective like something very real in your life like that. I don't want women to have to experience things like that to get perspective. I think that trying and failing, I think, days and weeks that don't go nearly as well as you expected. I think knowing that there are lots of things you want to do with your kids that you can't do, but the things that really matter you will do and you will prioritize is the right perspective. A wonderful CEO from Avon a number of years ago at our conference in New York said part of how she managed her career was letting work know for all the important things she would always be there, letting her family know for all the important things she would always be there. And she said the reality of her career is there was rarely a conflict between those two things. She might not make the low-level soccer game, but she was going to be there for the playoffs. She was going to be there for the championship. She was going to be there if her daughter really needed her there, period. And that, to me, is perspective. I hope as women, in particular through our 20s, we don't have to go through terrible experiences to realize I presented and it was okay, it didn't go great. So what do I learn from it? Pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and go back out there and get better and better and better. And don't hold yourself to an unrealistic standard or expectation. And just, make sure in all of this and the craziness and the dust around us, you're fundamentally happy, because that ultimately is how we want to live our lives.
I just want to add 2 points to what you shared, especially on the gender roles, because I think that's a really interesting thing. And I had a similar experience with my husband where we've taken turns being the primary breadwinner. And I talk about that in the book as the new model, just based on the way the economy works, that people cycle in and out. And it is interesting that I did hear from so many women, and I myself had that also, that during the time my husband was in the middle of selling a business but couldn't draw anything out of the business at that time. And suddenly I felt really cranky and pressured that it's not supposed to be like this. And I was like, why do I think that? What was really interesting during the course of the 5 years is that of doing this research, a lot of men got in touch with me. And they said, I married, or I partnered with somebody who I thought was going to have an equal career to mine. And now we've had children, and she wants to step back. And it's a financial pressure that I don't want to take on, because I never planned on us having this sort of old gendered kind of relationship. And I thought that was really interesting, because I think the future of work increasingly is going to be the cycle in and out, but how these gender norms still are so profoundly there.
I think there's an issue there in terms of what you said, the future of the workforce. I mean, we're starting to see, we have, 5 generations in the workforce now, and we know that our millennial group, and we get to know them as students here, we grow them and then get to employ them, we know that they have different attitudes to a bunch of these things, and they're not around parenting primarily, and certainly not exclusively, but there's a much greater sense of that there's a bunch of different stuff that I want to make a part of my life, and that's all really important to me. And I think as a set of workplaces across society, we're going to have to figure that out. And that is equally a male and female thing. Yeah. And so, I mean, my greatest sense of optimism for the role of women in the workplace is that our younger men are not tolerant of the stupidity of our workplaces either. Yeah. And I think, we kind of thought it was the dads that were going to make a difference for their daughters. I don't think that's right. Yeah. But I think it's the 20-something guys who are like, this is not the way it's going to work. I'm leaving my BlackBerry on the desk, and my BlackBerry, that shows my age. I'm leaving my iPhone on my desk, and I'm walking away. I think that's where work is evolving, and we don't know exactly what that looks like, but that will have an impact on families as well.
And one of the things I love to add when I talk about the book is that, yes, it's called the MomShift, but really it's about anybody who wants examples of how your career can look that is beyond the traditional lean in, never take time out type of career, because I think working moms, especially successful working moms, are really at the forefront or the coalface of all of the different ways careers happen. And so really, the lessons in this book, I think, absolutely apply to boomers who are looking for different ways, people who have other care responsibilities, people who just don't want to work the way we think careers need to look. I do want to get to questions, so I will have 2 last questions for the panel before we open it up, because I want to hear as much as possible from everyone else. One is, shared experience looking back, one lesson that you would say to take away from your own journey so far that you want to share.
Who wants to begin?
Start, Rena, or?
I'm starting. Let's start with
Rena. Okay. Well, I don't know how to answer that question. I was looking at it when you sent it to me, and I'm not exactly sure, but I do really identify with what you're talking about with happiness, that at the end of the day, the goal has to be being happy. And that's how I make the decisions that I make in my professional and personal life. So if I'm at home and I'm just feeling like I'm not mentally there, I haven't physically been there as much as I would have liked to, or I missed something, I just take a look at how that makes me feel. and what kind of effect it's having on my family, and what I pursue is how to make it right. So it's either, you know, planning things out in a way that it works for everyone. And for me, when the kids are happy, everything else seems flawless. Like everything else could be horrible, but when the family life is sort of solid, it's a good foundation and it feels good, everything else just feels really easy peasy. You know, work used to be hard, but then I had kids and now I have work, so now work is not, it is not the most difficult thing I have to do. But I think one for me, a lesson that I'm constantly in the process of learning, and communicating with my partner, because he's such a big part of everything that I do, how we raise the kids and how much flexibility I'm able to have at work. For example, in the fall, I would like one of us to be there after school when the kids are done, so that we can be there, find out if there are any playground issues, any bullying issues, any school issues. I can't do that. There is no way I could be at home at 3:30 Monday to Friday. It's impossible. So I asked my husband, I said, you know, is there a way we can work this out? And he said, well, we're going to make less money. I'm cool with that. We're going to have, it's going to be harder for me because I have to do this and this and that. And I said, I'm okay with that. You just need to figure out if this is something we can make work. And as a family, we figured out a way to make it work. It's not financially the best thing. Career-wise for him, it's not the best. It's not ideal. But for everything, it works really well. So I think it's, if there is one lesson I've learned, it's to pursue being in a good place. If you can feel like you're getting to a good place or trying to make that your goal, is constantly be in a good place with work and career and all the other commitments that you have. And also learning to be flexible and creative. Your life does not have to look like anybody else's. Your life has to work in a way that's perfect for your family and perfect for you, and it makes you feel good. It shouldn't always be a horrible struggle, and parenthood and having young kids isn't something you should be pushing through or trudging through or trying to get through. It's like you said, it's something you should be able to appreciate and experience and love and enjoy, and all of it, you know, being able to work and having that the ability to do that, and also being able to be a parent and be part of a family. I think that would probably be my big lesson.
That's so perfect that you said that, actually, because I think the biggest thing behind this book is that ultimately it's about stories that help people have a fulfilling life, where our careers are definitely one way. Meaningful work, exciting work, work that's financially rewarding is one way to have a fulfilling life, and family is the other part. I mean, one of the things I share in the book, that the biggest surprise for me is that children are actually really fun. And I think in the stress of the work-life discussion, we sort of miss that why have kids? Because it's actually really fun to do, and it is another way to have a fulfilling life. I don't think you need either one, because at the end of the day, it is very individual, but I think it's a real source of frustration and anxiety that we've set it up in this dichotomy that they're always in conflict, when what we know and are experiencing is that it's not actually true. So thank you so much, because I think you're right. At the end of the day, it's about happiness and enjoying it.
I will say quickly, professionally, personally, two separate things. Professionally, I wish I'd been a better advocate for myself. I loved Sheryl Sandberg's Lean In. She called us when the book came out, because it was starting just before it was coming out, to get negative spin. And she said to our CEO, who's based out of New York, whoa, this is turning into a story that's not the story. This is not an anti-woman book. It's not pull up your socks and lean in and things are going to go well. We did a ton of research with her to support the book. But her own story and the examples she provides, I think, are very useful for people. Our message is there are organizations, there are obstacles, understand them, be sophisticated in navigating them, push hard to make sure you are creating change for yourself and others. And what I say to women is, don't take it all on yourself. Like, when things don't go well, don't just look at what you brought to the equation, look at what's going on around you. If you've taken on a promotion and things aren't going as well as you think they are, do you have the conditions for success around you? Are you being supported in the way you need to be supported to be successful? And if not, what are you going to do about it? And that's not just about you, that's about the people who put you there. So professionally, I wish that I had understood those things earlier. I didn't. I am where I am. I like where I am, but I think that's useful. Personally, given that kids are so meaningful in my life, and given that once I decided I was ready to become a parent, and it looked like at a certain point that it was quite challenging, have that conversation early, and just think through these issues and become informed. What I would say to any woman, moving into your 30s, thinking about these two issues is know your body and start having a conversation with your doctor to know your body. And you don't have to make a decision and pull the trigger too early, but don't put your head in the sand. If you think kids are something that might be on the horizon, then be informed, make sure you're making informed decisions, and don't end up in a situation where all of a sudden you're 39 going, wow, how did I end up here? Because this actually really does matter to me. And I think that is advice I give to friends and strangers all over the place.
Have you gotten to know your body lately? You're on the subway saying that to women?
I met with a consultant from PwC last week who I'd met once before, professional meeting. Came out, she was 33, and she said something about thinking about having kids. I'm like, okay, I'm sending you an email right now. You're gonna go speak to your doctor. You want an FSH test, which measures blah, and you want a scan of your ovaries. And she's like, I'm like, I know this is inappropriate and way too much information, but one day you'll thank me. She's like, okay. And I sent her the email right there.
You're absolutely right. I mean, and for me, I actually had a cousin to learn from who was maybe just a couple of years older than I was. She was 27, and she had huge issues getting pregnant. And a lot of the health issues we had were very similar. So to me, I thought when I was 25, I thought I better get on this thing. Because who knows what who knows what could happen. But I didn't, when I had my son, I didn't have any maternal feelings. I didn't, run after babies. I didn't care about people's babies at all. And I wasn't, I didn't have to hold them. I didn't, I didn't have any sort of like, all of a sudden when you want to be a mom. I did not have that when I was 25 or 26 or 27, even when I had Arjun. I just knew that I did want a family, and I knew that at some point it's very possible my body wouldn't cooperate. And that's a conversation I had with my husband well before we got married. We were like 20 and 21. And I said to him, I have a cousin who has fertility issues. I see how it's affecting her marriage, and I just want to know that if we didn't have babies, that you would be okay with it. And he said, absolutely. So we could adopt, absolutely. Or we could not have babies, absolutely. So and it's funny because we don't make that a part of the conversation because we also feel guilty putting that pressure on a woman who's 21 years old. Right. We want her to feel like the world is. 21. Yeah.
31, start having the conversation.
But it's one of those things where you want people to be aware, but you don't want them to feel limited by it. And in a perfect world, we could be aware of everything we want to do one day, but not just plan for that one thing. We plan for many different things in our lives, and we can plan for them concurrently without feeling like, if somebody said I wouldn't have picked this career at 21 if somebody said to me, if being a parent was the only important thing in my life. Being a parent was one of the important things in my life. This career is also one of the most important things in my life. I choose to pursue both. I choose to be very stressed out at times. I have a lot to do, a lot of pressure, but I feel very grateful that I get to do the work that I do, but then at the same time get to have the family that I have. But that's why it's an important conversation to have with partners, I think, because you're equally in it. You're both in it. And even though the conversation might come a little bit early, might have come way too early for my husband at the time.
Never come.
I was just like, or may never come. Yeah. But for me at that time, it was easy to just get it all out, have it up front, because I knew where I stood. I knew that I wanted the family, and for me, and for some people, you don't know. You don't know at 23 if children are going to be a part of your future. You don't know, and that's totally okay. But for me, because I knew, I wanted to plan for it.
But at 30, start getting your information. I'm single-handedly increasing the Canadian fertility rate.
I'm just going to add 2 points to that, and maybe then we'll open it to questions. Just the last 2 points that came out of my research that I think round out the discussion that we've just had. The first is, the most common question I get when I talk, especially to younger groups, is when is the right time to have a baby, and what if I don't have a plan? And I think the real lesson that I heard from the privilege of following 500 stories over 5 years is that it doesn't matter, honestly. Like, it's great if you have a plan, but if you don't, no matter where you are, you have more choices than you think. And it's about finding out, and that's what the book to me really does, is show you at different points, different ways to make it work. One thing I really noticed is that we so often hear a success story, like the women sitting up here, and you think, oh, well, of course it came out like this because they did that and they did this. But it's only looking back that we're creating this artificial as though you always knew you were going to do this. And it's just people making decisions based on the knowledge you have and where you are at that time. So that's one point that I wanted to add. And the second was that, you know, it might not look the way you think, but it will be good, was the other big lesson that came out of the stories I heard, where a lot of women said, you know, at 21, I didn't know what I didn't know, but there's so many choices out there that I'm so surprised at how much I like the way this has come out. So those are my last 2 points that I just wanted to add to round it out. And then if we just want to just generally open it to questions to anyone on the panel, that would be great.
I think we've got a mic going around, so we've got a couple of mics.
So I just wanted to ask, should we lie or should we not lie if we are pregnant?
If you're pregnant?
And I'm not pregnant.
Tanya, thanks for letting me know. And she's sitting next to her boss. So if this is your cool way of letting Julia know. So you've heard from the liar and the not liar. I interviewed, she's not here, someone who still works at Ryerson, used to work for me. First interview, great, real terrific connection. And then she called me about a week later and said, there's something I need to tell you. Since the first interview, you know, I found out I'm pregnant. So this was like the uber not liar. I hadn't even offered her a job. And I'm a lawyer, and I'm thinking, okay, well, now I have to offer her the job. Otherwise, it's a big human rights code violation. So I'm stuck. I've got to hire her no matter what. And I have. And she's had another kid since, and she's fantastic here at Ryerson. I guess I would say that to me, one of the key success factors is being willing to ask for help. And it's harder to ask for help if you are less transparent about when you need it. At the same time, we know that we should not be naive, that in lots of circumstances, revealing things will lead to, you know, getting fired. There are lots of contexts where it's easy for me to say we are an employer that has equity policies and you know, all of that kind of good stuff. So I think, you know, from my perspective, that's another one of those really kind of it depends sorts of things. Mm-hmm. But I think it does connect a bit to that, you know, Sandberg quote about don't leave before you leave. You know, if you are telling people you're pregnant, figure out why it is you're telling them. And are you saying it because you're already starting to pull back and you're kind of creating that circumstance where you're allowing yourself to start walking back? Or are you saying it because you think it's the right thing to do and you think people can help you and support you through what the next phase is going to look like?
I think the bigger issue is it's such an unusual circumstance to be interviewing for a job when you're pregnant. I think the bigger issue is if you're going to get pregnant, at what point would you feel comfortable starting to have a conversation with your boss saying, you know, this is on the horizon? First of all, any woman in her 30s who I'm looking at hiring, I assume is going to have babies. That might not, you know, materialize, but I'm saying, okay, at some point we're going to be crossing that juncture. We just had an incredible event as part of a speaker series around engaging men. The head of KPMG and then the head of equities and securities at TD both spoke, and it was an extraordinary discussion. And at the end, what I loved is 35 different companies, very senior Bay Street men, 65% male audience. The conversation revolved around trust, and how do you build the relationships of trust, where you as a male in your 50s are saying to your talented 30-year-old, I see this organization as a place where you can do anything. You are a part of my team, and such a valuable part of my team. Let's start planning for the next few years. So I'm supporting the heck out of you, and you're comfortable doing the things that you want to do. Most of them said, I would love to have that conversation, but A, legally I don't think I can, and B, I'm terrified. We kind of agreed, you know who you can have those conversations with, but start to cultivate the kinds of relationships where you're saying to your female employees, let's both agree that this may be on your horizon. Let's start to think and plan about what that means, because I want to invest in you. And when someone experiences that kind of sponsorship behavior and that kind of relationship with someone, odds are they're going to hunker down and be a strong contributor on your team and see themselves evolving in that organization much more significantly than, do I tell, do I not tell, when I tell, you know, if someone does the old fake, hey, congratulations, oh, God, what a pain in the ass. You know that, and ultimately over the course of time, that will reveal itself in the way you are treated in that organization. So I think the bigger issue is creating the relationships of trust to start having conversations that are meaningful to us as women and meaningful to organizations as employers.
And having lied about this, or not lied about it, having omitted that I was pregnant, I have to say, if I was working in that software company that I was working at before I took the television job, and I was going to another software company, and I was sitting with HR, maybe finalizing the last few details after going through each stage and demonstrating that I am the right person for the job, and when it came down to it, I would say, you know, by the way, I need to tell you this, I am 8 weeks pregnant, whatever. And I know I would have done that, but I was in a television environment, I was in a not, you know, family-friendly, child-friendly environment. I knew that in that moment, if I said, by the way, I'm 8 weeks pregnant,
You wouldn't get the job.
I wouldn't get there's no way.
And there are lots of environments like that.
Yes, and this one, and television especially, is just, is so, you really don't feel like you're working in a modern organization when you work in television. And my newsrooms is one of the best ones out there. But anyway, so there is something you have to be very, you kind of have to, you know, you've got to protect yourself. You've really got to really put yourself first, especially when you're in an environment where you're not going to be put first by the people that you're surrounded by. But when it is a safe environment, when you have been working for a company for you know, a few years, or you know sort of what you can expect from a certain type of company, and that kind of thing. If you feel like you're in a safe environment, it's much easier to do. But you're right, it's up to employers too, and companies too, to make the work environment a safe place where honesty is valued, and it's certainly not punished.
Thank you. I really appreciate all the remarks that have been made by the panel. I've got a 13-month at home, so I find this all very incredibly encouraging. The question I had for you is that, you know, prior to becoming a mom, I don't think I was ever very emotional. I had very good divide and very pragmatic, probably one of the things that I really enjoyed about myself. But that pragmatism is gone, and I'm very much more of a emotional person. So the question I had really for the panel is what advice do you have for managing your emotions, particularly when your child is sick or something's not going well at home? Like what can you do to manage your emotions so you can switch off and get back on the podium and run the meeting and be that person that has to be pragmatic?
That's a good question.
I've got the name of a great therapist. That is not a joke.
But I mean, why is, you know what, and as a storyteller, as someone who's often out in the field dealing with real people, find myself at murders, I find myself, you know, in situations where I'm in a shooting environment where a child has just lost both parents, and, you know, I'm watching them come in and out of the house, or I'm in all these different situations where I'm actually really grateful that I have this new. And it is, to me, it's an empathy. It's something that I didn't have before I had kids. Before kids, you know, the facts were facts, and you know, you report on them, and you do it a certain way. It doesn't really matter. You get your clips, you harvest whatever information you need, you put your story together, you're done. But when, you know, you are a parent, and you know, you can sort of put yourself in that position. You know, understand that, you know, behind the story, there's actually a real story. The way you report on things, the way you talk about things, the way you treat the information, all of that changes, but in a very good way. So I feel like since becoming a parent, I've become a better reporter. I've become better sort of at dealing. I can get people to talk to me, which some other reporters might have some trouble with, because I don't look at them as a clip or a piece of a puzzle in my story, or, you know, to me, they're real people. And people sense that, especially people going through tragic situations can sense that you're, you know, whether you're really interested in them and really hearing from them, and when, you know, they're just, you know, another clip for you or whatever. So what I'm saying is that it's great to be able to have that, and it'll come in handy in so many different ways, and it'll improve your life in so many different ways. But as far as turning things off, I've now learned to sort of like, when I'm at work, actually not thinking a lot about the kids. But there was a point in my life, especially when your kid's 13 months, you can't really extract yourself. You're just, I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's biological. You're tied to them on some level constantly. I don't know what it is. But it does pass, though. You know, you get to a point where you're not constantly thinking about them and trying to do whatever you need to do and thinking about them and worried and concerned and not able to detach
Elaine,
yourself.
when you have teenagers, you are so happy to get to work. You're like not even missing them for a second. You're like, thank God I have an early meeting today. It's all good. I just, you know, I mean, one thing I was going to say is that I think we shouldn't kid ourselves that it's risky for women to be emotional at work. I think when women are emotional, we tend to get penalized for it. And so I think there are risks there. I think you have to, and I think you have to know yourself, and I think sometimes you have to know when you have to walk away, or you have to find a ladies' room, or you have to, if you have an office, you close your door. And you know, I think there are real risks for women. Because we'll be seen as soft or not tough enough, or gee, now she's a mother, like look at her, she's a ball of mush all the time. So I think you have to think about it and be strategic and know yourself, know what the people around you expect. I think at the same time, you need to be willing to ask for help, and that was the point I was making before. And there are times when you need to be able to, and you need to develop those relationships of trust. And you have to find those places where you can show your vulnerability and ask for help, because there, in everybody's careers, there will be times, and whether or not you're a parent, because we all have parents, if we're lucky enough to still have our parents, there will be issues in our lives that will force themselves upon us, and hopefully we will have built trust relationships around us that we can draw upon at that time. But I don't want to be too Pollyanna-ish about it. I think, as women, we have to be careful also.
I'll give one example. I think know yourself is key. But I have great respect for Katie Taylor, who's now the first female board chair of a major bank, RBC. And she spoke at an event we had in the fall, and huge interest, 250 women, a lot of younger women. And she gave the example of being very passionate, very intense, very emotional, and really having to come to embrace it, because in her 20s, that was sort of being squeezed out of her. The distinction in terms of that example, what Julie's saying is, you know yourself. You know if you're starting to get out of hand emotional, like you just don't feel like you have, and whether you're a passionate, intense person who might articulate things differently, present an argument differently, get more vested in the argument, and if that's who you are, her advice to the group was embrace it and run with it. The last question of the night was, what does becoming board chair at RBC mean to you? And she started to cry, and she said, it's the first time in my career that my peers chose me as their leader. It's not just working hard and moving ahead and getting a promotion. My peer group I've worked with for 10 years chose me as the person to lead this bank forward and them forward. And it was a beautiful experience and moment. I thought she had to embrace that part of herself, because she was never going to be a cerebral, very calm, cool, and collected male around the table. She is who she is. And I'm more along the lines of that. And I'm conscious of, at times, trying to rein it in, and conscious of, Jessica, my colleague, works with me 7 times a day. I say, my fucking head is going to explode. It's going to pop off my body. And I'm like, there are situations where that's probably not appropriate, but over the course of a day, that will come out several times.
Couple situations.
Maybe
not so appropriate.
Yeah. I have 2 things I want to add to that. The first is one of the things that really came out of both the stories I heard and what's helped me is, especially when you're a mom with little kids and you're working, one of the first things to slide is our own friend network, I find. Like, I don't get to see my friends enough, but I'm very lucky that I have a group of women that I can just send an email to and be like, this sucks, this was what's happening, and get that connection. Continue to invest in your own social support, because I think that's one of the things that, we do get stretched really thin, just the way careers and work happens in the course of the day and demands of our family. And the first thing to go is any investment in our own fun and ourselves and anything like that. The second thing I wanted to add that we haven't touched on a lot in this discussion, but I heard a lot in the book, is that so many women I spoke to said because they felt like they couldn't get what they wanted in existing organizations, they became entrepreneurs. And we know that female entrepreneurs are most businesses are started by women. And that's one of the things driving it, is that look at creating your own platform and your own business. So if you want to be the person who is like that at a meeting, you own it. And that's okay. Find the way that you can really feel comfortable. And one of those avenues could be entrepreneurship. So that's something we didn't look at a lot, but the book does look at. Anyone else have a question or a story or comment that they want to add based on what they heard?
Oh, I don't need one of those.
I just want to point out, because then I actually have a question then, and I'll read the book so I can figure out if it's in there. But I remember when I was pregnant, which was 11 years ago, and my mother kept saying to me, oh, hope the baby's healthy, hope the baby's healthy. And people always say that, but when you actually have a baby that you know that's going to be born with a disability that they inherit, the challenge is much different. Yeah. And I'm just wondering about families' experiences that you heard about, that women trying to balance that with having a child who has a disability, because that's something, and also you may be coping with that yourself.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I did hear a few stories like that and how they're coping, and also with partners who had terminal illnesses and how you cope with that. And I think it comes to the core of what Julia said earlier, which is about ultimately a discussion like this is not about just working mothers. It's about creating a workplace that understands that life happens, and sometimes life is shitty and difficult, and what can we do to support people through that place, and all of the different roles that organizations and employers and colleagues have to play a role in that. And I think that honest conversations like we've been touching on, and then policies in terms of, and I heard some great stories. There's one that comes to mind about a woman who needed to homeschool her severely autistic son. And she just assumed that she had a boss who said to her, you need to sort this out by the end of the summer, a female boss, interestingly. And so she thought, I'm just gonna have to leave the job, and it's gonna be very difficult financially, but it just was not working at any of the schools that they had their son in. She ended up, that woman, her boss ended up just getting moved out, and a man came in who said, why do you think that we can't make this work? There's so many ways now with technology, and we have choices, and we can do this and help you through it. And so she ends up, she works a compressed day, so she works 7 to 10, and then she homeschools her son, and then she logs back online. I think, to your point, if we start to share stories about how the workday and careers can all look so differently yet be successful, then hopefully we can help families at different points just get through it. I think it's a really pressing conversation as well, because with aging populations, I mean, maybe you're not a mom, but most likely you have a mom or a dad or someone in your life that you are gonna have to care for at some point, and how are we gonna be there when that happens? So thank you for raising that. Yeah, it's a key.
I think it's a really important point. I mean, this is not a huge room, and I'm looking into this room, and there's 3 of us here that I know of, and I don't know who I don't know in this room who have children with disabilities. And I think it's, it's the point we made earlier and the point you just made about honest conversations. There's something, the fertility point is one. There's some conversations which we're still not that comfortable having in the workplace around pressures that impose themselves on us. And I think, we here are really trying to have some important conversations about how the whole person comes to work, and what does that mean for us as an employer in embracing the whole person with the stressors and the great opportunities that person has and abilities, and how do you pull that all together and as an employer respond to that. But I think that for those of us who are privileged to be in leadership positions, one of the important answers is being role models and spokespeople and being honest about those challenges. And it's something I try very explicitly to do, is to, and it goes to, also the point about being a solid 7, really being out there and being able to share where the challenges are. And I think even if you don't know who you're influencing, you don't know who's out there in an audience or who's reading a blog or what have you, who will read that and say, oh, whoa, I had no idea that she's experiencing that or she's going through that. Or someone in your team, you had no idea they were experiencing that, but because they've heard you say something, they now feel comfortable or empowered to come to you and say, hey, I've got this issue too, or I've got this version of it. I need better support. I need some help finding my way through. So I think, I never underestimate the vulnerability of people. So I'm never, I never want to, overestimate how easy it is to have those conversations, because I think for many people you simply can't. But I think for those of us who are not vulnerable, having the conversations, opening up a window into those challenges can really be very helpful in our workplaces.
Does anyone else? Oh, go ahead.
Just one of the things I wanted to bring up about your book, and you talked about this earlier when you said someone had questioned why we're still having this conversation. Until you and I talked, I felt as though I wasn't really going anywhere. I thought that since I'd had the children, that things had really sort of ground to a halt for me, because I wasn't doing all the other things that my friends and colleagues were doing. I wasn't at the parties and the events and networking and taking on extra assignments and all of this stuff. If anything, I was trying to figure out how to take myself out of the loop a little bit so I wasn't working 70 hours a week or 60 hours a week. I was trying to pare back as much as possible while I was watching all these other people take on more and more and and take on different opportunities. And until we had that conversation, I had no appreciation for how far I had come since having my first baby. And then when that clicked for me, that was huge. I thought for the entire time I'd been parenting, I was thinking, I'm struggling at parenting, and I'm trying to get all of this stuff going, and I never sat back for a moment and never went for a second until that point.
Right.
Look at all of this that has happened, and we've been able to do since this little person came into our lives. And that for me was huge, just releasing myself from that.
That's been the best part about my interviews, is that so many women have said that. And the lesson that I take is that whether you're a mother or not, like, we never get a chance to sort of pause and say, oh yeah, I did do all that. And it is pretty good, because you set a goal, you achieve it, and then you're already on to the next thing. And there's no time to really reflect back and say, wow, I did that, and I am doing better, and it is coming together, and it's working. And that was for sure one of the best pieces of feedback, is that I had so many women post the interview say to me, yeah, this was the first time I've had a chance to reflect and realize that. And the thing I take away is that we all need time to just pause and say, just look at where you are now and think about all of the times maybe you wished or imagined getting what you have now. And I think there's something great to living a joyful life, is enjoying and celebrating where we are and what we have. And I think it's too hard for working moms and for women, because we're constantly, as soon as we step out of that room, every message you'll hear will tell you, buy this, do this, be better, do better. Nothing says you're good right now, and it is good, and enjoy it here. I mean, that's just not the way anything's set up, and I think that takes a real toll.
Sounds like a pretty great note on which I get the opportunity to thank this. Oh, okay, you're gonna do one more question. The microphone is in the hand, so we'll have one more question. I'm just sensitive to people who's here on lunch hours, and lunch hours are coming to an end, but the last question.
I know it's a big question, but as a grandmother in the audience,
that's great.
And someone from early childhood studies, one of the biggest issues that I've been hearing from families, including my own adult children, and all of them and their spouses have very high careers. What about childcare? No one's mentioned that except for 1 second. How do you arrange your childcare to make all these wonderful things happen? Because we need a greater investment in childcare at Ryerson and everywhere.
There we go. Well, that's a quick one-liner kind of answer question, right? Like that's easy. We'll wrap that one up in 20 seconds, and away we go. Let's have some coffee and dessert and head back to the office. Thank you very much. It's the elephant in the room. You're absolutely right. And, you know, I'm sure we each have our stories. I mean, over the course of my life, I've used every single form of childcare out there, sometimes multiple forms at the same time, because I had to make things work. I think you're right. It's the broader public policy elephant in the room for parents. And it is a shocking problem we have, that we make it so challenging for people to find adequate childcare. And we've heard enough issues in the news recently to really give us pause about the job that we're doing. So I think it is a huge elephant in the room. I think people do cobble things together, and you know, I look at us and we're pretty lucky, kind of privileged, kind of middle class plus women who are able to do things, but it's an incredibly, incredibly hard challenge.
We have, and for the longest time, we had help from our families, which I'm so grateful for. We had grandparents who were happy to be in the picture, and yeah, I see you pointing at yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's...
Yeah, stop. Can you stop that right now? Go be more helpful. One of these women who think they should be in the workforce when they should be taking care of their grandchildren, I tell you.
But fortunate enough to have parents who were at home when we were in Vancouver who were amazing. And then we moved here and we had to hire a nanny. And it was funny because I was the only one working. Wasn't the best option for us financially, but it's one of those things, right? You make certain sacrifices and you make them in phases to make things work, especially just during a certain period of your life. And we were lucky, and then my husband found work and things are much better. But I was actually talking to a child care advocate, and her name completely, what's that? No, I can't remember what her name was, but she said to me, she said, you know, why, we talked about all the incidents at daycare that have happened. I think we had a huge number over a short period of time, and that raised alarm for a little while. You know, our kids going into safe, certified childcare in these places, are they safe for them? Can we feel confident when we drop them off and go to work, that kind of thing? And one of the things she talked about is that there isn't a child care policy, and she said, because the only people who care about child care are feminists and socialists. She said parents aren't coming to the table like they should because they get through that period of time, they get through it, and they just move on. So it's sort of like we're not taking a collective responsibility. And once I get through my child care issues, I'm not necessarily helping the next batch of parents call attention to their own child care issues. And there's not this concerted effort to make it happen. So that's sort of a big issue, but you know, you do whatever you can to just make it work and just make sure your children are healthy and safe. And at the end of the day, when you come home and they see you, you know there's no other place they would rather be, and you get through it, right?
Do you want to add anything else? I'll just add one final point, just because I know we're pressed for time. Absolutely, I think childcare is one of the biggest, gigantic issues that we need to face. In another hat that I wear, I personally am deeply involved in this issue. I think the reason to care about politics is because this is how we're going to address these kind of issues. On a personal note, like probably everyone here, I've used a whole mix. We've done everything from daycare to nannies to family to all of it together. And I will add as a final note, in the book, I do look at all of the different ways that people are setting this up and ways to frame it and fund it, and people who set up schedules to work around it, because not everyone obviously has the ability to pay for quality daycare. How do you work around that? And I have some stories. There's no definitive one answer, and it is, like you said, the giant elephant on the room.
So I hate to break up what's a really fun and great conversation, but I think that it is that time. I really want to thank the panel. I want to, on behalf of myself and Wendy Sukier, who co-sponsors Women in Leadership with me, I want to thank all of you for carving time out of really busy days. I think it's so important to do that. And I really want to encourage you, those of you who can, to stay. There's still some dessert, there's coffee. We have the room till 2:30, so don't feel like you have to run away. The bookstore is in the back of the room with copies of Reva's book, and she's happy to sign it. She has to sign mine. It hasn't been signed yet. And why don't you, if you don't mind, please join with me in thanking our guest for such a fun opportunity to talk.